All right, today's guest is a real treat, a very good friend of mine, and really an expert in the sports medicine field. Gary Renil, better known as the anti-ice man, is somebody who has dedicated 50 years of his life to researching and debunking why ice doesn't work and how we can actually facilitate healing at what would be considered a tremendous speed. His resume is probably too long for me to list, so I will put that in the show notes, but trust me, he's a wealth of knowledge and is going to be a real pleasure to listen to today, so I hope you enjoy. All right, Gary. Well, welcome to the show. So when I was getting tips on, this podcast and how to make it great, they were like, well, make sure that you invite some guests initially that you have a good conversation with. And you know who came to mind first?
Well, thank you. I
You did.
appreciate that.
I love having conversation with you, not only because you have a wealth of knowledge, but because you're easy to talk to. I feel like you've got so much information, and I love how you debunk a lot of misinformation. You changed my life. So just to give people a little bit of background on us, we did a podcast back in 2016, actually two. So we've had this conversation before, and I think that more people should know that icing is nonsense and it doesn't work. And I don't think there's anybody better to break that down and really help people understand why it doesn't work, how it delays healing, and I would also like to share some of my personal stories of how you have helped me as an athlete recover at what would be considered record speed. I don't think that you think it is, because you're like, this is what the body does. This is how this should be the standard. But by all the way that we have done it up until this point, everybody thinks that there's a timeline that it takes for recovery. And you have literally helped people crush that on all different levels. So
That's very true.
yes. So let's get right into it. So icing, why does it not work?
Well, I try to shift that a little bit, and I've learned over the years, over 1 million people have heard my anti-rice message, and rice being the rest ice compression elevation protocol. I've learned to say, instead of it doesn't work, is it the best way
Okay.
to manage the situation?
That's fair.
And to this point in time, not a single person has ever said, yes, it's the best way. Here's why. It's not the best way. Does it work? In spite of you using ice, in spite of the rice protocol, people get better. But they're making things take far more longer than it should, and a great deal of additional discomfort that you didn't have to have.
Right. So when the doctor says, go home and ice it, or the PT or anybody's trying to slap ice on, break down why it is, because you're going to blow a lot of people's minds right now. You say, well, icing, it's what I do. My kid gets a hurt ankle, I'm going to put ice because that's what we do. The nurses, I find myself constantly having to combat people to not put ice on my children or myself. I'll be healing from injury and I'll go into the best, the physical therapist and all these things. And they're like, well, we're going to ice it for 20 minutes. I said, or before you leave, put some ice on it. And I say, no, thank you. And they look at me like I'm insane. And I have a lot of conversations, and I try to explain without sounding like arrogant or like a know-it-all or anything like that. But I feel like I have a better understanding of why it doesn't work. But I would love for you to explain why. When you say doesn't work, I guess it depends on what your goal is. I think if somebody is screaming in agony because they just broke their ankle and they're in a lot of pain, maybe for pain management, right? We could say that icing could potentially offer some services.
There are other ways to reduce pain and that are better than ice, but ice will reduce the symptoms of pain, the signal of pain. So
Right.
It does work for that, but is it the best way? And you just made the best point of all when you just made your comment a minute ago. And that is, what are you trying to do? What's your goal?
Right.
And that's the miss, because the vast majority of people that I work with, and I have the phone numbers of over 100 professional athletic teams, head trainers, and directors of rehab. And at this point, well over 2,000 collegiate teams use my technology. And I can tell you that the vast majority of people that I've talked to, in fact, only a few have ever even given me a decent answer, not the best answer, but they give a decent answer on what's your goal. So you roll your ankle. So what's your goal? What are you trying to do? Well, I want to put ice on it. No, that's what you're going to do. What's your goal? What are you trying to do? And when you break it down, what you're trying to do, and if we can agree on this up front, everything becomes a lot easier. What you're trying to do is prevent further loss and regenerate that which has been damaged or destroyed. Does that sound reasonable? Put on the top of the page is what you're trying to do?
Yeah, and in layman's terms, we're trying to heal.
You're trying to, yes, you're trying to heal ultimately. That's the distant goal. But up front, what you're trying to do is just prevent further loss and regenerate that which has been damaged or destroyed. So what does that mean? Well, further loss is caused by congestion in and around the damaged site. What will happen is the congestion will build and it'll suffocate and kill otherwise perfectly healthy cells that were not involved in the initial trauma. So you've got to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. So the next question should be, if you're following this through the way I have, is, well, how do you do that? How do you decongest the area? By making it cold, sitting still, and wrapping it tightly while sticking it up in the air? That's not how waste moves through your passive lymphatic system. So that's not going to work very well. Does it work at all? That's not the question. The question is, what's the best way to decongest the area in and around the damaged site? Because clearly you don't want to suffocate and kill otherwise perfectly healthy cells that were not involved in the initial trauma. So you got to solve the problem. How are you going to decongest it? Well, there's only one way. That's through your passive lymphatic system. And how does that work? It's a passive system. You've got to activate the muscles in and around the damaged site to move the waste through that passive lymphatic system. And when I go back in my history, back in the 60s, the 1960s, that's last century, people would say, coaches would tell you if you bumped your leg, rolled your ankle, jammed your finger, whatever, they would say, keep moving. Don't sit still. It'll tighten up. And walk it off. We all knew that. Everybody knew to do that. And if you didn't, you got stiff. And it hurt more, and you couldn't bend.
That's so true. I can't say how many times I've been in practice and I'll be sore and stiff, and not even injury, but I mean, your muscle tissue is torn a little bit. That's the reason why you get sore, right? But as soon as you get moving, you're like, okay, now I'm warmed up. Now I feel like I don't feel like I did 10 minutes ago when I felt like I couldn't move and it was difficult and I felt sore. Yeah, a movement makes you feel better.
That's how you decongest the area in and around the damaged site. That's how it works. It's not my opinion. That's every clinical textbook says the same thing. This is how it works. It's a passive lymphatic system. So you want to decongest the area, and you need to do that via muscle activation. Making it cold, all making it cold does is slows everything down.
Right.
That's not your goal. Now, the next thing that happens in causing additional damage is disuse atrophy. Big surprise, disuse atrophy is from disuse.
Right.
So why would you want to sit still with a bag of ice wrapped tightly around the area while sticking it up in the air? How did you figure that was going to help with disuse? Well, it doesn't. You've got to use. You've got to load the tissue.
How did they figure that? I mean, how did this even become a thing? Was it just based on an opinion? Was it ever based on what they thought was research?
No, it was never based on research, that's for sure. In fact, there's 4 worldwide reviews on the topic from about 2000 on, and the conclusion of all 4 worldwide reviews, I'm paraphrasing or summarizing the 4 studies together, although popular, there's no evidence whatsoever this is beneficial. That's the actual literature's review of the topic. Now, you say, well, how did it start? Well, it started because back in the day, back early in the 60s, 62, a young boy by the name of Everett Knoll hopped the freight train in Somerville, Massachusetts, and he hit a stone abutment and ripped his arm off. And when he ripped his arm off, he fell to the ground, and his arm was off. Well, when they got him over to Mass General, a young doc there by the name of Ronald Malt made a new decision. This has never happened before. He said, we have a very healthy 12-year-old and a fully intact arm. Let's put it back on. So he said, well, how do we do that? Well, you have to get everybody in. You have to get a neurosurgeon, a vascular surgeon. You're going to have to get an orthopedist. You have to get everybody in the room.
Time.
It's 62. There's no text machines. You got to get everybody. So Malt gave the order while we're figuring this out, put that arm on ice. Now, why? Because that would slow down the decaying process. It's not connected to the body anymore.
Right.
So what ends up happening is they do the surgery, they reattach the arm, and as a result, he's now a success. It worked. Now, with that said, the media, but mostly the television networks back in those days, there were only a few stations, would come and say to the docs, well, what do we need to know if that ever happens? What are we supposed to do? Because remember, before you threw the body part away. Well, now what are you going to do? How are you going to how are you going to teach the public what to do if you sever a body part? Well, they said, remain calm. Don't panic. That's the first thing. That's rest. Keep the tissue cold. Keep it out of the sun. That became ice. Compression was wrap a tourniquet around the area and prevent a bleed out or reduce the blood flow coming from the severed body part. And so that became compression. Elevation was keep the intact part above the heart to try to slow down the blood flow. That's all. The Rice protocol has nothing to do, literally nothing to do with managing damaged tissue. It has to do with preserving a severed body part and preventing a bleed out. The whole thing was made up for no good reason. But see, the public heard when they heard the doctor answer the question, oh, if you get hurt, put ice on it. Now,
Right.
I traced that back as far and deep as you could go. And in my book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to how it started. But then I lucked out. The doctor who made up the Rice protocol, Dr. Gabe Merkin, read my book. And he called me and said, I read your book, you're right. And he recanted. He said, look, I made this up in my 1978 sports medicine book, The Rice Protocol. Research has clearly shown I was wrong. Don't do it. It delays healing and gives a specific reference to the fact that it causes additional damage. So Merkin admitted it. But wait, he went further. He then wrote the foreword to the second edition of my book. My book is called ICE, the Illusionary Treatment Option. Dr. Merkin wrote the foreword to the second edition of my book. So I got the doctor who made up the most recognized, referenced, recommended protocol in Western medicine to not only recant, but write the foreword to the book that took down his legacy. So that's how it got started. It should never have happened. And here's a crazy thing about that. 40 years of widespread use, tens of millions of individual treatment sessions, and there's still no protocol. In other words, how cold do you do it? You rolled your ankle. How cold are you supposed to make it? You take it down to 67 degrees, 91. Well, what's your goal? And how are you going to know when it's at that temperature? And how often should you put it to that temperature? And for how many days following the injury should you make it at the temperature? And should it be a different temperature each day as you're getting better? And what about if you're 20% body fat, or if you're 40% body fat, or if you're 5% body fat? How do you accommodate for the insulating factors of the fat? These are simple, easy questions with the protocol. There's no protocol.
A lot of guesswork.
I'll give it. I'll go with the word guess. I call it an illusionary treatment option.
Right. No, I mean, it's so funny how something like this can just catch on, and it just becomes a cultural understanding of how people think that it should be dealt with, and that we put so much trust in our medical professionals to get it right the first time. And this is why I always encourage free thinking. You know, ICE doesn't, for me, it's not something that I enjoy, even when I've had an injury. Well, that's not true. Sometimes I've broken my nose and it's so hot that it feels nice to get my face back to like a neutral temperature, because it's just annoying how hot it is. But I haven't experienced that despite having facial injuries and other injuries since I have used your methods, and getting the inflammation out will also help reduce the discomfort that I experience.
And that's a very fair point. See, you made your goal to make it hurt less. It'll work to do that, but at what cost? Yes, it makes it hurt less. I didn't say it didn't make it hurt less. I just said it doesn't facilitate the healing process. In fact, it disrupts the healing process. In fact, very often, it causes more damage than the help that it did. And by that, I'm sure you've heard of things like frostbite. Mm-hmm. Well, what's frostbite from? Making it too cold. Well, how cold are you supposed to make it? Well, I don't know. Put a towel between you and the ice bag. Well, how many towels? Should it be a thin towel, folded twice? What about if I'm
Should it be dry? Should it
30%
be
body
wet?
fat?
Yeah.
Do I put as many towels on if I have more body fat? Then what do I do? How long do I make it? How will I know when to have it to the right temperature? And where'd you get that number from anyway? So you made up all this stuff, and that's the issue. Not that you used it for pain control, because it works for that. But at what cost? I liken that to the sympathetic bartender that gives the alcoholic a drink so he can temporarily feel better. Does it solve the problem? No. Does it help? Maybe. Does it make things worse? Probably. So you see the problem?
Yeah.
Yes, it helped. But
Well,
at
in
what
the short
cost?
term.
In the short term, you would have been better off decongesting the area in and around the damaged site. Now, why that works is like this. I have a snow analogy to explain that. If you knew it was going to snow 24 inches in the next 24 hours, if you knew it, 1 inch per hour, if every hour on the hour you would open your front door, with a good stiff broom, you could effortlessly keep your sidewalk clear of that inch of snow. You get it?
Yeah.
If, however, you wait till morning and open your door to 24 inches of angry snow, I assure you, it will not be effortless and you will not clear with a good stiff broom. Don't let the snow accumulate. So you get hit in the face, you begin to swell. Don't let it accumulate. You got to decongest the area in and around the damaged site. You cannot trap it there. When you put ice on, it actually literally traps the waste in and around the damaged site and prevents the natural flow of oxygen and supplies. Now, can you think of any reason? I realize you're not a brain surgeon, but just an easy question for you. Can you think of any reason why you'd ever want to trap the waste in and around the damaged site and prevent the natural flow of oxygen and supplies?
You got me there.
Well, that's precisely what icing does. And worse, if you follow the rice protocol, it makes it even worse because now you're compressing it and resting it.
Right. I always liken this when I'm talking to people about why they shouldn't ice. They say, well, think of it like a highway. Think of your veins and your capillaries, they're highway, and you've got traffic and you've got really important supplies. And all of a sudden there's a traffic jam or the highway's broken. I mean, that's an extreme example, but for whatever reason, it's difficult to get in there, mostly because there's a traffic jam. Because what do you got to do when there's a traffic jam? You've got to remove the cars in front to get the cars behind to get through. So there, if you can facilitate, but if you throw ice on it and you just basically add more traffic, it doesn't help the situation. You basically close down more roads. You close down more highways. Now you close down the exits, right?
Yes.
So people that were trying to get off the exits to maybe get a little bit of movement out of the way, if you're closing those down, right, then all of a sudden you've made traffic much more difficult to move anywhere. And that's basically how I try to tell people how icing works.
It's perfectly reasonable what you just said. And the problem is if you don't know what your goal is, if you actually don't have it written down at the top of the page, my goal is to prevent further loss and regenerate that which has been damaged or destroyed. That's your goal. Why would you think trapping the waste in and around the damaged site and preventing the natural flow of oxygen and supplies would help? It doesn't help. It's wrong. And when you make it cold, you're closing down those highways. You're not expanding them.
Right.
You're closing them down, and you're trapping the waste. Now, why in the world would you ever want to trap the waste in and around the damaged site? And that's what the rice protocol does. Ice is part of that protocol, and ice is a big contributor to the problem.
Right. So talk to me about the lymphatic system a little bit. We brush over it lightly, but people may not understand exactly what that is. And I also wanted to ask about, we hear about lymphatic massage, and pushing. So are you a fan at all of somebody getting in there with their hands and trying to actually maneuver the fluid from the outside into the lymphatic system?
I've met a few people who are capable of doing that. And I know a lot of people, and I've met a few who are capable of manual lymphatic massage and producing a significant result. I've never met anybody that can compete with muscle activation. In other words, loading the tissue, having the muscles compress the vessels, because what happens is your lymphatic system is basically like a garbage disposal system. Okay, in your sink, everything's built up, the garbage is kind of floating on the top, the vegetables and all are kind of a mess in your sink, and until you push that button on the wall, that stuff just sits there. But when you push the button, vroom, it goes down, it's gone. Well, that is the muscle activation around your vessels. So you've got about 165,000 miles or so of lymphatic vessels in your body. Lots of vessels are. If you have never done it, I would suggest anyone listening who wants to see this, just Google lymphatic system image, and you'll see the image of where all these vessels are. They're superficial, intermediate, and deep vessels and everything in between. It's incredible. They're all over the body, but it's the garbage disposal system trying to move the waste.
Right.
Well, it's passive. So passive means you've got to activate the muscles around those vessels to squeeze the waste up a chamber, the swelling up a chamber. The empty chamber now has negative pressure that then pulls the waste out of the interstitial space, and so on. Visual is like milking a cow backwards. So you get it? You'll never forget that. That's what it looks like, and that's what you're trying to do. Stillness is the enemy. It's the exact wrong thing to do. Now, can you take your hands and move the waste through the passive lymphatic system from chamber to chamber, and would that work if you're really skilled? I've met a couple people who I believe are that skilled. Most people aren't. And by the way, tell me the hardest way you can think of to do it. Right. Do it manually. Right. Now, I have met some of those same people in the lymphatic massage space, and they believe that it would be useful to massage the lymph nodes and try to free up the congestion in that area. I believe that, but you better be good.
Right.
You better be good at it and you better have strong fingers, and you better be willing to do it for 2 hours. I can take an electronic muscle stimulation device, and I can activate the muscles in the whole leg from the tip of your toes to your groin.
Have you ever had surgery, Gary?
Several surgeries, yes.
Okay, so I know that you can't give medical advice, but in your own circumstances, when you've had surgery, you come out of the surgery, what's the first thing that you're looking to do?
Activate the muscles in and around the damaged site. See, there's more to it than just decongesting it. When the muscles are loaded, the muscles actually produce and release the myokines that drive or mediate the tissue regeneration process. There's 2 things you've got to do post-trauma. You've got to decongest the area in and around the damaged site, and you've got to rebuild the related vascular network. Until you've done those 2 things, anything else you do is compromised. And I've never had anybody argue with me. I've had really smart people try to debate me. No one's ever said, well, that's not true. No, it is true. Up front, there's 2 things you got to do. You got to decongest the area in and around the damaged site, and you got to rebuild the related vascular network. And what that means with the vascular network, have you ever seen the bruising around a problem?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that bruising is broken vessels.
Not only have I seen, I've experienced.
Well, that bruising is broken vessels. So you've got to rebuild that related vascular network in and around the damaged site. That's how the repair and cleanup crew get to the damaged site.
Right.
And that is called angiogenesis. And that is what happens when you activate the muscles and you create the stress that causes the vessels to sprout new capillaries on the end. So you've got to do those 2 things. You've got to decongest it, and you got to rebuild the related vascular network. So I have an orthopedic surgeon, a shoulder surgeon. I don't have a lot of these, but I have one that we deal with in Kansas City. And I have a video. If you want to put it up with with your piece, you can. I'll get you the link to it. But here's what he does. He puts sterile pads on post-op before he dresses the wound in the surgery suite. Activates the muscles electronically, and then immediately begins doing that when they leave the surgery suite.
And he doesn't wrap it with compression?
No, then he dresses
then he does.
it.
Okay,
Well, he doesn't compress
it, but it's not compressed.
No, he dresses it afterwards. But so here's when in the video what he's asked is, well, why do you do that? He said, well, that's easy. When I take the dressing off in 5 days, they're not swollen, bruised. They have less pain. They have more function. They're using less drugs. Next question. Now, why is that true? Because when you congest the area in and around the damaged site, and worse if you make it cold, now you've compressed it, you're resting, you're icing, you're elevating it, which has very little effect, if any. I mean, barely. If there's an effect, it's insignificant. That helps to drain waste through your passive lymphatic system. It may help with venous return, but it's not helping with the passive lymphatic system. So it's not really draining the fluid from the area. People, put your arm up in the air. Why? Is that how my passive lymphatic system works? Go like this with your hand up in the air. That'll work. But passively, it's not going to do much of anything. It certainly isn't going to be what's best.
Well, and I think it would work just the same if you had your hand
You are correct.
neutral or in another, because our vascular system is actually, with the valves and everything, is made to go the way that we would according to gravity, right? So
Yes.
this doesn't actually would be difficult more difficult. That's why your arm starts to fall asleep or something if you leave it up in the air too long, because then you've got to build the pressure to get it up there, where we have all the stop valves the other way.
And then the lymphatic system has a one-way system. So it only goes one direction, it only comes back. And it's not like the vascular system that has a pump from the heart that goes down through the blood vessels and then through the body and back through the venous return. That's a closed system. That's working off of your heart pumping. The lymphatic system's passive. It only goes return. It doesn't have an out, only back. And it only moves when you activate the muscles in and around the damaged site.
So what are you using to facilitate this? Because I know if you're coming out of surgery or you've done something where obviously it's not easy to just load the muscle tissue. You broke your ankle, right? You can't obviously walk. I mean, I'm sure there are people who don't have a device that maybe could sit and do some kind of, any kind of movement with the tissue themselves, that they can do. But if you're unable to do that, or if you want to facilitate this, even when you're just sitting, you want to sit and watch TV, what are you using?
Well, I recommend the medical technology that I'm involved with. It's called H-Wave. And I work with hundreds of elite athletes every year. And that's what people who get it are doing. That's what the Kansas City doc is doing. He's using our technology post-op.
How much is one of those?
A couple $1,000s.
Okay.
And how much does it matter? Well, in the space that I work in, it's insignificant.
Oh, sure. I'm sure for professional athletes and teams and whatnot. But a couple $1,000s might be too much for, a mom or a dad who just needs to be able to pick up their child sooner. They just want to get back to work. They want to, so is there anything else that you recommend?
Well, yeah, there are other things I recommend. Move. So flex the muscles in and around the damaged site as often as you can. And the docs will likely tell you post-op, if you jammed your finger, they'll probably tell you to go like this and just keep moving the best you can and add whatever you can do. And that'll work.
Well, yeah, but a lot of them don't do that. A lot of them say put it in a splint and don't. I'm seeing more of this happen now where they do recommend movement, but I still see it where they don't, where there's like, we're going to, the best thing we can do is put your finger in a splint and leave it there for 6 weeks or whatnot, So, I mean, it's wild that we're at, in 2024 and we still see this advice given, but
unfortunately, I have advice that isn't very popular.
Well, that's why I have you here.
If a doctor or a therapist tells you that, my advice is to try for 20 seconds or so to get them to listen. If they won't listen, find someone else.
What would you do if, though, like something like a tendon is trying to reattach or something like that? Obviously, at this point, you don't want to disrupt the reattaching. So you wouldn't, where do you draw the line of like how much movement would be beneficial when you're trying to get something to stay in place long enough to reconnect?
Well, first of all, it reconnects best by activating the muscles in and around the damaged site. And you can Google a simple thing, just put in loading and tendon repair, or loading meaning activating the muscles.
Right.
And you'll see that it's well established in the literature that if you sit still and do nothing, it makes it more difficult for the tissue to mend, because the muscles, when they're activated, when they're stressed, the muscles produce and release the myokines that drive or mediate the tissue regeneration process and actually help with the mending. It doesn't hurt. So my rule is real simple. Use your brain, never cause pain. So how much tension should you apply? Use your brain, never cause pain. I actually had a military officer pull his pectoral muscle off his humerus, so off of his arm. And when I got to him, I was meeting with their group, and the commander was a little bit late coming to the meeting, but the guys had told me what had happened. He had done it. He had surgery on Monday. He did it on Friday, I believe. And I was meeting with him, I think it was on Wednesday. I think I have my days correct there.
Right.
And when he came in, he said, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit late, but I said, sir, the guy's already told me. I get it. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you going out of your way and getting here for me. So I said, so what's up now? What's next? He said, well, the doc wants me to take it easy and give it a chance to heal. I said, that's inconsistent with reality. Now, everyone stops and looks at me. First of all, hardly anybody ever contradicts the commander. First of all. And I just said, what you just said is inconsistent with reality. Now, why? Well, because sitting still is not going to facilitate the healing process. It's actually going to slow it. It's actually going to dampen the healing process. And one of the guys said, well, Gary, you got to be careful. One of his clinicians said, you got to be careful because you don't want to dislodge the anchor. I said, oh, really? I said, Commander, you got the doc's number. Give him a call, would you? I want to talk with him. And he's like, I said, come on, you're a commander. You got the doc's phone number. Call him. So I want to know if he thinks if you sneezed, would that dislodge the anchor? And then one of the commander's clinicians said, no, that wouldn't dislodge the anchor. I said, I will never even approach the tension created by sneezing. Picture a sneeze. Ugh!
Right.
Okay, I'll never make it that hard. I'm doing this. That's all. A little muscle activation in and around the damaged site. That causes the muscles to produce and release the myokines that drive or mediate the tissue regeneration process, most specifically the mitochondrial biogenesis and the angiogenesis. So that's what's happening. The stem cells are being recruited to the area. Because the area is congested, the repair and cleanup crew can get to the site. It's actually to your disadvantage to sit still and do nothing. It's not to your advantage at all. Now, there are exceptions, of course. Okay, I get it. But the exceptions are hardly ever the rule.
So I'm going to go into a story that I had experienced with the Mark Pro, although I have many, but I think a lot of people will potentially remember. And if not, maybe I'll share a photo as I put this podcast out. But in my second fight, in my return, I had a very large laceration under my eye here, and I had 6 stitches, which were done in the ER, and my face got very swollen. And I remember I called you up and I had a conversation with you about finding the route for the lymphatic system according to the head and face, because I have a Mark Pro at home and I've used it in numerous ways, but I know that there is a route through the body that you would typically try to place these pads on, and the book kind of comes with this pamphlet, but I didn't see anything for, the upper area. So once I figured that out, I think I had the pads here and I had them, I think I was on the back of the, my muscles here. And I was thinking like, okay, let's see how this goes. And I turned it on, and of course, it makes you have this like little funny face. But the rate at which I healed from that at around age 35 was extraordinary by all typical standards. Now, I didn't just do the Mark Pro. I also had the hyperbaric chamber and I had red light. But those were my 3 main modalities. Hyperbaric chamber is going to help deliver oxygen, but the oxygen is going to have trouble getting there if it doesn't have a clear path or if there's a lot of congestion. So I had the Mark Pro on, and then it would also help, the topical and the mitochondria and everything with the red light. So I used those 3 things. And within 2 weeks, it was not only completely gone, but you could almost never tell that I had the injury in the first place.
That's how the tissue heals. The human body is designed to self-repair, not self-destruct, but it's contingent upon movement. And if you don't clear the area, now, we would recommend using our prescription product, H-Wave, for something that significant. It doesn't mean what you did wouldn't work, because it did. But we would rather have it be the medical product with a prescription before we're putting it on actual injuries like that. But using it off-label, if you choose to do it, you can use it off-label. It's just, that's not what we would recommend. We're actually cleared by the FDA for TMJ. So a lot of my football players, a few MMA fighters have done the same thing with me. But the football players get hit in the jaw and the hockey guys get hit in the face.
Oh, I've had the same problem.
And-
We need after.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know
Yeah,
that I might
so
be able
we're
to.
actually cleared for that with our medical product, and we do go right over where you said, right over the TMJ, and then right on the back of the traps, and you just do this. And to explain why that works, again, if you Google the image of the lymphatic system, you'll see the vessels are here, and the drop-off point is right here at the thoracic duct. So moving waste from your face to here is simple. You could almost do it chewing a wad of gum. I mean, it just is not that difficult. Now, doing it electronically is more comfortable, more controlled, and it doesn't fatigue you. Or chewing a wad of gum, which would work, that would work, but it's impractical for most
Right.
people to do
And
that for
maybe
5
just
or
move it,
6
getting your
hours.
shoulders into it, get a little dance move going.
I actually had one of my military officers call me, and he said, Gary, now I know you told me that I can put this on my face. And I said, yes, sir, absolutely, meaning our H-Wave, our prescription product. I said, and he's a clinician, so of course he can do it. And he said, okay, my daughter is having her wisdom teeth removed, and she doesn't want to have a big fat face for the holidays. And tell me what to do. I got a call back, I believe 3 days later, but at 2 days, the swelling was out of her face. And all we did, you just put the pads over and you just pump, and it does this.
Yep.
That's what it does. And the passive lymphatic system moves the waste. That's what happens. Remember how it works. It squeezes the muscle around, the muscle squeezes the passive lymphatic vessel, pushes the waste up a chamber. The empty chamber now has negative pressure, pulls the waste out of the interstitial space, and so on. Again, remember, it's like milking a cow backwards. So it's so easy to move it, but not if you don't know. And I watch people who are still swollen a week and a half later, and it's like, guys, this is a 2-day problem at the most. And yet, and by the way, the doctor commented to this individual, to the daughter, "You're a fast healer."
Like, no, I'm healing at the rate my body should be able to.
That's the normal rate of recovery. That's one of the things. People will often ask me, are you speeding up recovery? And I say, absolutely not. I'm normalizing the rate of recovery by removing the related obstacles. A huge difference. You say, oh, it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. I'm not doing anything creepy. I'm not speeding things up. You were slowing them down the way you were doing it. All I'm doing is normalizing the rate of recovery by removing the related obstacles.
So I know you've worked with plenty of professional teams, the NFL, the MLB, the list goes on. You've got to have some really miraculous stories. And again, I know how you think about this. You're like, well, it's not miraculous. It's just normal. But other people are going to say, well, that blows the standards out of the water. So maybe a story that you could share about an athlete or that stands out to you that people wouldn't expect somebody to be able to do this.
I'm a little restricted because those are all prescriptions, so I'm regulated by HIPAA, so I can't actually say a player's name.
Oh, you don't have to say
But I can tell you this. This is something over on the Mark Pro side of the world. All 30 Major League Baseball teams use my technology. More than 2 out of every 3 Major League pitchers use my technology, and that's based on my sales to those people and the team head trainers or head directors of rehabs feeding back to me how many people are using it. So I have a real count. And I've talked them out of ice. I would say, I think I'm safe to say that half the Major League Baseball teams don't ice their pitchers anymore. And the other half are using it, certainly not like they were using it before. But Clayton Kershaw, am I saying his name right, from the Dodgers?
Yeah.
Last year in an interview, I think you know Lindsay Berra.
Yes.
Lindsay did an article for Mustard, which is Tom House, is the famous quarterback pitching coach. If you don't know him, he's like Dana White in.
Okay, I don't know him, but I do know Kershaw because Johnny is my fiance is a big Dodgers fan.
Well, the Dodgers are one of my biggest customers, by the way.
Okay, good to know.
And they're one of our first customers because they're within minutes of our office.
Right.
That's how we got to them in the beginning. But when Clayton was being interviewed by Lindsay for the article, he said, and I have it on my website, or you could Google it, or you can tell me and I'll prove it to you and I'll give it back to you so you can show anybody that wants to know. But he said, remember, this is one of the most known pitchers in Major League Baseball. He said, well, actually, I don't ice anymore. And really, you don't see icing in the majors anymore. It's kind of a thing of the past. You got to realize how unbelievably profound that comment is by one of the stars. It's not really seen in the majors anymore. 10 years ago when I first got there, they thought I was from Mars when I said, don't ice your pitcher. Actually, one of the first people that I spoke to in Major League Baseball, they asked me to come in and said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, what's going on? They said, well, he's fallen out of rotation. He's not ready in 5 days and he needs to recover quicker. And I said, well, what are you doing now? And they said, well, after he throws, we put him on ice for 30 to 45 minutes and And if he's still sore tomorrow, we do it again. I said, well, stop doing that. And they looked at me like I was absolutely out of my mind. What do you mean, stop doing that? I said, that's not working. Stop doing that. Well, they listened to me. And that pitcher got great results. And he told one of his old roommates on another team who got great results. And now I have all 30 Major League Baseball teams that know my name, that use my stuff and buy my product. I believe most would agree that icing is not a good idea. And clearly, I'm nearly certain that everyone would agree, everyone that I deal with like that would agree it's not the best way to manage the situation. Now, with that said, what did I get them to do? Well, I got them to activate the muscles in and around the damaged site and decongest the area by milking the cow backwards. That's it. That's all I did. And that's all my book is about. And sometimes people say to me, well, you make it sound so simple. Like, it is. I don't make it sound simple. It is simple.
Yeah, it's so wild to me that since we have last done our interview since 2016, that I've been talking to people and really trying to change mindset. And, even my friends who get injuries, come over, get in my chamber, put on the Mark Pro, I put it on them, and to still see icing be such a part of the way that we deal with injuries is a bit frustrating. Do you ever find that? I mean, do you get frustrated by icing still being relatively prominent?
I did until I made up my new rule. And the new rule is, I hear you. I believe that you believe what you're saying. I just have one question for you. Is it the best way to manage the situation? And thus far, not a single person has said it was the best way. Well, yeah, what? I didn't say it was the best way. Okay, well, why would you do anything but the best way? Well, what do you mean by that? And then I explained to him, what are you trying to do? Well, we're trying to stop it from getting swollen, from swelling up. Really?
Oh, I hit that one all the time. Icing, well, I want to prevent the swelling.
No, you don't want to prevent the swelling. That's the whole point. The swelling isn't a good or a bad thing. It's merely the accumulation of waste at the end of the inflammatory cycle that you have not yet evacuated. It's not a good or a bad thing. Don't make it an enemy or a friend. It's just there because you didn't evacuate it. Now, what's supposed to happen? Well, what's supposed to happen is, A, you shouldn't intermingle the words or join the words inflammation and swelling. They're two different words. The inflammatory response is phase one of the 3 phases of healing. It's inflammation, repair, remodel. Swelling isn't a good or a bad thing. It's merely the accumulation of waste at the end of the inflammatory cycle you have not yet evacuated. So you get the difference? So The only question is, well, should I prevent it? Well, first of all, putting ice on doesn't prevent it. It merely delays it. When the tissue rewarms, the inflammatory response is going to resume and the fluid's going to come. You know why? Because that's how the repair and cleanup crew get to the damaged site. So you don't want to stop it from coming. The big question becomes this, and for any of the doctors or clinicians who are listening right now and they can't stand me and they wish I'd go away, I just want to ask you a simple question. Is there too much fluid coming to the damaged site or too little leaving? Answer that question and you'll solve all of your issues. It's a very easy thing. Is there too much fluid coming? In other words, you believe that your innate intelligence is sending the wrong amount of fluid to the damaged site every time on every person for every kind of musculoskeletal injury. What's the chances that the innate system that puts eyelashes where they belong and fingernails where they belong virtually every time? Thus far, I've never seen a fingernail growing out of an eye. Okay, so as far as I know, the immune system is really smart. So it's likely not sending the wrong amount of fluid.
Right.
What's happening is we're not evacuating enough. There's not too much coming. There's too little leaving. Why? Because the Rice protocol is wrong. It's an illusionary treatment option. That's the problem. The problem is we've got it wrong from the start. The immune system knows how to manage the situation. Why would you want to prevent the repair and cleanup crew from getting to the damaged site? Why? I want to slow it down. Why? There's not too much coming. There's too little leaving.
Oh, it makes a world of sense. It really does. And when you break it down into that thought process, I hope that most people can get a visual and understand that it's not about that swelling and inflammation is not bad. And it gets demonized a lot. I hear people taking anti-inflammatories, which I would love to ask you about. I think I know your opinion on those. Those are not great. But it's, well, I want to reduce the inflammation because it's painful, or because it's bad. It's not good to have inflammation. So I do my best to debunk these, but please, you take this stage
I actually have a paper on my website called Anti-Inflammatory, and my lead co-author is the editor-in-chief of the Physician and Sports Medicine Journal. And there we just clearly lay out what's going on. I'll break it down to really simple terms for this point. If you want to read the paper, it's on my website for free. It's called Anti-Inflammatory.
I'll put it in the show notes as well.
So here's the thing. It's so easy to follow this. The pharmaceuticals convinced people that inflammation was bad. That's it. That's what happened. Nobody else would ever say, oh, the inflammatory response is wrong. Well, wait a minute. Isn't it phase 1 of 3 phases of healing? A person by the name of Ledbetter, in the landmark paper in 1999 from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, Buckwater wrote the paper. He quotes Ledbetter saying, there can be inflammation without healing, but never healing without inflammation. Why in the world would you block the inflammatory response? That's
there
what's
we go.
That's the signaling process for bringing in the repair and cleanup crew. That's how the macrophages, the neutrophils, the insulin-like growth factor, the stem cells, that's everybody coming to the site to solve the problem. And you're going to block it? Now, I have a crazy question for you. Let's just say they're right. Let's go with them and say, yeah, you're right. There's too much, not inflammation, there's too much fluid coming to the damaged site. The inflammatory response that's automatic. Very unlikely anybody's got that wrong. We had to fix that because a doc one time, I was talking to 100 docs, and one of the docs said, well, what about stage 4 cancer last week of chemo? I went, otherwise healthy people. I have no idea if that person's immune system is working correctly. So no, otherwise healthy people. So otherwise healthy people, it's unlikely the immune system is sending the wrong amount of signaling from the inflammatory process. But maybe the fluid is accumulating, but not because too much is coming, but because too little is leaving. How do you make it leave? By a muscle activation in and around the congested area. That's how you make it leave. But you get to a spot where you say, well, what about if I was trying to solve the problem of too much fluid coming to the damaged site? Like there's too much coming. Okay, how much too much? 2%, 11%, 41%, hands different than feet, you different than me. How would you know? And how would you know when you did it? Oh, that's 11% cutoff. We did good there. You can't.
Nobody can determine that.
Of course you can't determine it because it wouldn't be wrong. The immune system isn't going to get it wrong.
Right.
I once told a story at one of the graduate classes I was speaking to, and I made it up, and I don't think I've used it since, but I really like this one. You're going to heal almost no matter what you do wrong. And I'll just give an example. I hope this is... I'm going to try it again. It's only the second time I ever gave this analogy example, but let's just say this is an individual who is living on the street. I've changed some of the words I said the first time, who's living on the street. And they have really bad habits. They smoke, they take drugs, they're on crack, they sleep on the sidewalk, they eat pizza crust out of the trash can. Just terrible. Everything you can think of, they do wrong. If they rolled their ankle, sprained their ankle, they would get better. Now, how's that possible? How could that person ever get better? Because they're going to do everything wrong. They're not nourishing themselves, they're not resting, they're not taking care of their ankle, but ultimately they get better. They'll limp for a while, and then they'll stop limping, and their ankle won't hurt anymore. It might take a lot longer than you and I would take, and clearly if we were following what the information we're talking about, we could do it even faster because we wouldn't be slowing it down anymore. We'd be normalizing the rate of recovery. But that individual will get better. That's how good our immune system is at solving problems. It's so good that even under those terrible conditions, that individual would ultimately get better.
I like to tell people that we are our own best doctor. There's no better doctor in the entire world than the one that's already inside your body because it knows what it wants to do.
Yes.
It's already got the system in place. You just have to help it out.
And so I'll give you something to throw to your audience, and maybe you already know, but as you said that. But most people have never heard of myokines.
Right.
Now, myokines were discovered, I think, in 97, maybe in 95. And I say that because myostatin may have been the first one discovered. And they didn't call it a myokine when it was discovered. But whatever. We now know there are hundreds of myokines produced and released by the muscles. Everything. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is produced by the muscles that helps nerve regeneration. And you say, wait a minute, what, by doing what? Our muscles, to me, are the largest pharmacy in the world.
Have you heard about the hope molecule? Maybe, I don't know if it's the same thing as this, the
I have not heard about hope.
But and I wouldn't be able to tell you what the medical term for this, but they call it a hope molecule. And basically what it is that when the muscles contract, they actually release this molecule that improves mood, lifts depression, helps with mental health. Working out is one of the best things that you can do to improve your mental health and to improve rates of suicide, rates of depression, these kinds of things, because it is such a powerful synergistic effect of loading the muscle tissue and allowing the body to really do what I believe it was designed to do. But it's almost magical.
Well, the muscles are producing and releasing myokines. I suspect the hope molecule is one of the myokines. 30 years ago, there was no such conversation. When I grew up, I've been doing this a little over 50 years now. So when I grew up, that sounds long, doesn't it? A little over 50 years now. 50 years last October 1st. So when I grew up, we were told that muscles had two purposes, appearance and locomotion. That was it. We now know that's not true. Muscles produce and release the myokines that drive or mediate the tissue regeneration process.
Well, to be fair, probably I would assume 50 years ago and even beyond that, people used their muscles and bodies a lot more. So maybe it wasn't at the forefront of a problem, like an issue like it is now, where people sit for, 16 and 18 hours a day and play video games, or sit at a desk at a computer in the dark all day and do their work. And they wonder why they suffer from depression, crave sugar, and have all the other, bad side effects that come from being stagnant.
I'm very confident that sitting still, as it says in my graphic, and please put my graphic up with this, stillness is the enemy.
I agree.
Just flat out stillness is the enemy.
I completely agree on that. So that brings me to one more question I want to make sure that I don't forget to ask, and I've had this in my mind since the beginning of the podcast. But as we talk about the meltdown, we talk about ice not helping, actually slowing down. So then what do you think about heat and heat application? Could it potentially speed? So if for example, I had either the H-Wave or the Mark Pro on, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put my sauna on at just like 80, or I'm going to have like a nice little warm heat pad. Nothing extreme. But do you think that potentially that would be beneficial?
The way you asked it, yes. But the way people do it, no. And here's the difference. If you only use heat, you're dilating the vessels and you're increasing the flow in with no exit plan.
Right.
So that's not a good idea, because you're going to increase the fluid coming to the damage site with no exit plan. Whereas if you had the H-Wave on and you're activating the muscles, or you're riding a stationary bike with a toe clip on, then you're activating the muscles, so you're actually improving circulation. So you're increasing the flow in and simultaneously promoting the flow out. I don't ever want to just send the stuff in passively, increase the flow in basically passively with putting heat on it without an exit plan. So in my book, I touched a little bit, and I had to, again, it's been a while, so my book is called Ice, the Illusionary Treatment Option. In there, I touched on heat and just said, look, be careful. Heat feels good. Ice generally doesn't feel good, but heat feels good. So just be aware that passively dilating the vessels and increasing the flow in isn't necessarily to your advantage if congestion's your problem. So have an exit plan. If you're going to use heat, have an exit plan. Have muscle activation simultaneously.
How long can you leave either of these devices on? Has there ever been a point or anything where it has become what would be considered detrimental?
Well, I'll give you real examples. People are using it 15 to 19 hours a day. It's pretty normal post-op with the big surgeries. So you probably know somebody by the name of Kelly Starrett from the CrossFit world. You recognize that name? The supple
I'm not sure I
leopard
do.
guy.
Okay.
What he did, he's a very well-known physical therapist, conditioning coach. He's playing everywhere I go. Kelly's already been, so he's very well known out there in the elite space. And Kelly got a new knee. He blew his knee out skiing, and had to replace the whole thing. And when he called me a little before surgery, I said, "So what's the plan?" He said, "Well, I'm going to be using the H-wave." I said, "Yeah, how much?" And he said, "Well, a lot." I said, "Well, how about like 15 to 19 hours a day we shoot for?" And he documented the whole thing online. So you can go online, you can put in Kelly Starrett, or just Starrett is his last name, new knee, H-wave, and he documented the whole thing of what happened. He was so far, like you were saying, ahead of the standards, they didn't even have to do with him. He was doing a full squat at 6 weeks post-op with a new knee. You can't do that. Well, yes, you can. That's the normal rate of recovery. We did not speed things up. We normalized the rate of recovery by removing the related obstacles.
I love that. I'll argue it a little bit because I think nobody could flex their muscles for 19 hours a day. So I do think that there is some speeding in that, if you will. I'll give a little credit there to discover or be a part of or facilitate the knowledge of a device that would help facilitate what our bodies want to do naturally.
The way you said that, I agree. Yes. You wouldn't sit there and have that muscle activation by yourself. That would be very difficult to do 15 to 19 hours a day. But I'm removing the congestion.
Yeah.
So I'm not making it heal faster.
Right.
I'm just getting it back to the base so it can heal faster.
Yeah.
I'll show you a picture before I leave. And a Major League Baseball head trainer sent me 2 pictures. One was an ulnar collateral ligament reconstruction, second surgery. So it's in the elbow. And he sent me a picture of the player's hand post-op, all swollen. Looks like he's wearing a mitten. And I promise I'll show you. I can't put it up because of HIPAA, so I can't put it up. The medical rules of disclosure. I can't tell you who the player is. But his hand's swollen, like he's wearing a mitten. 72 hours later, same hand, completely clean, no swelling. Anybody who knows about hands and that problem knows that's a 10 to 14-day problem. I had it cleared in 72 hours. So the trainer said to me, I thought you'd enjoy seeing these 2 pictures. And I said, well, that's pretty cool. So I called him, and I said, I have a question for you. Why'd you let it swell? I said, it was your second surgery, so clearly you knew it was going to swell. So why'd you let it swell? And a quote he said back was, "You're never satisfied." I said, no, actually I am satisfied because you gave me 2 great pictures. But why did you let it swell? Clearly you knew that the 24 inches of snow was going to accumulate if you didn't remove it. But think about it this way. When that hand post-op, if we had started activating the muscles in and around the damaged site and moved the waste out, never let it get past 1 inch of snow. Remember, 24 inches of angry snow, so 1 inch per hour for 24 hours. If you cleared it out every hour on the hour, it would have never been swollen. You just kept it clean. Now, the question would be, well, why wouldn't you do that? And well, wait a minute. What happens if I don't do that? What happens if you don't do it is you're going to suffocate and kill otherwise perfectly healthy cells that were not involved in the initial trauma. That's what's going to happen. You're going to suffocate and kill them because there's no circulation. So cells are going to die that weren't involved in the trauma, in the surgery. Then on top of that, you're going to have disuse atrophy because you can't move your arm and hand for 2 weeks. So you're going to have atrophy. Then on top of that, the probability of faulty scarring. So what happens is if you don't reorganize the repair tissue, remember there's 3 steps to healing: inflammation, repair, remodel. So if you don't remodel that repair tissue, there's a high probability of developing adhesions. If you've ever had the pleasure of having someone break adhesions for you post-trauma, I hope that never happens to you, but if you let the adhesions grow because you don't reorganize repair tissue, it affects functional range. So you lose functional range. So the 3 big things that go wrong is you suffocate and kill otherwise perfect healthy cells that weren't involved in the initial trauma. You have disuse atrophy. You have faulty scarring that leads to adhesions that cause a loss of functional range. And then on top of that, the regeneration side of the formula is this. That's what happens in the loss. These are additional things that go wrong if you don't manage it correctly. With that hand, we didn't have that problem because we got the swelling out and we were functional. The fingers moved, so we didn't have any of those issues. Then on the other side of it, there's two things you got to do post to regenerate that which has been damaged or destroyed. You've got to rebuild the related vascular network, and you've got to lower the myostatin levels. Myostatin levels elevate from inactivity, and activity lowers the myostatin levels. What does myostatin do? It inhibits muscle regeneration. So they're the 5 things you got to deal with. We dealt with all 5. Guy's hand has no swelling in 72 hours. How much does that matter? I got him ahead by 2 weeks. He's 2 weeks ahead of that. Plus, he doesn't have the additional loss. So we don't have we don't have cells that suffocate and die. We don't have disuse atrophy. We don't have faulty scarring or adhesions that disrupt functional range. We are rebuilding the related vascular network, and we lowered the myostatin levels. So we did everything you had to do by simply eluting the tissue or activating the muscles. It's also dreadfully simple. We are designed to self-repair, not self-destruct, but it's contingent upon muscle activation.
I love that. I had a physical therapist. I was actually working with 2, and I work with quite a few because I have some at the UFC Performance Institute, and I have others outside that I like to work with. But I was working with 2, and I had an injury, and one of them was, they do some manual stimulation and movement, and they rub and whatnot. And so one was trying to break up some scar tissue. Mm-hmm. And mind you, this injury was still was within 2 weeks. Pretty good injury. And my other physical therapist, who I trust implicitly, was really brilliant. I don't think that physical therapist does him justice, because there are physical therapists that ice and do a lot of the things that really probably don't. For sure, we could say they don't help in the best way. So he said, Misha, the way that the body works is when you lay down scar tissue repair, when you start to repair the body, basically, your body needs to take instruction on how to repair, how to put the scar tissue through movement. And I was like, the lights went off, and I said, that makes so much sense. And it goes right along with what you're saying, in that loading the muscle tissue, not only does it help clear out more waste, but you're actually giving information on how to restructure through movement. You're giving information, because if you don't move at all, the body kind of says, I don't know exactly if I need it to go this way or this way or this way or that way or this. So it starts laying scar tissue down all like a big stack of hay.
Yes.
Every which direction, because it doesn't know which way it's going to need to use that in the future, because you're not using it all right now.
And that's why there are 3 phases: inflammation, repair, and remodel. The remodel phase is when you pull the tissue in the direction of function. So if you don't, then you get faulty scarring, which often are called adhesions. And how they fix adhesions? They have to stretch you out and break the adhesions.
Right, which causes, again, more damage. We could have just
why wouldn't you just reorganize them during the process? Well, because they believe that stillness is the answer. Remember, their protocol is rest, ice, compression, elevation. So they're causing you to trap the waste in and around the damaged site and prevent the natural flow of oxygen and supplies. They're causing disuse atrophy. They're causing faulty scarring with that protocol. I'm not indicting anybody here, but that's what that protocol does. And then if you say, well, how do you reorganize the repaired tissue? You have to pull it in the direction of function. So you have to load the tissue in the direction of function. I have a paper called Healed. And in my Healed paper, I rewrote the paper by Buckwater that I quoted a little bit ago with Ledbetter saying there can be inflammation without healing, but never healing without inflammation. In the paper, I wrote it in 10th grade language compared to the way Buckwater wrote it for the journal. But I give the journal references, so you can go read the journal paper.
We appreciate people like you, by the way. I love listening to people who can take the high-tech medical language and really put it in a way that we can understand, because not everybody goes to medical school.
Well, my Healed paper is free. Again, all you do is just put in my last name, Reinl, and put in Healed. It'll pop right up. And then if you want to read the journal article, have a better understanding of what I rewrote in people talk as opposed to medical talk, You can read the journal article. And it isn't, Buckwater's paper is really relatively simple to read, but he's got probably 100 words that you may have to use a dictionary for. In my paper, you probably don't need a dictionary.
I love that. You have been fantastic, as I knew that you would be. Thank you so much for giving some information. And I hope that the listeners can at least take away that there are better ways than icing and that it may not even benefit you for ice. So reconsider before you put an ice pack on your kid. Reconsider before you put an ice pack on yourself. And I hope that everybody took something away from this, because I know that I have. And I'm so glad that you've been, whether you know it or not, very instrumental in my career and help facilitating my healing as I'm in this latter chapter. It's really important. I think it's important for everybody. But when you're talking about a game of not even inches, eighths and tenths and hundredths of inches, when you're really trying to be the best at your craft, you have to find the best way to do it. You have to find, or you should always be seeking, the most efficient and best way to do it. But that doesn't eliminate the day-to-day people who just want to get better from their injuries and their surgeries. This happens all the time. Do you want to be the best parent that you can be, or do you want to be 50% of 50% capacity? Everybody's going to say, well, I'd rather be at 100. If somebody gave you a choice, we're going to say, would you rather, be able to carry half of your groceries in, or would you rather have, how efficient do you want to be? And I think that's what we're talking about right now, is the level of efficiency that we can achieve through using our bodies in the way that they were designed to heal.
That's perfect. And I want to end my part with something I said earlier. And when people are looking at this and you're going to talk to your therapist, or you're going to talk to your doctor, or for that matter, a friend, and you're just trying to lead them out of the ice age, just ask them if they feel what they're suggesting is the best way. Don't argue about whether it doesn't work or not. That just gets you in a battle that's too hard to fight. Don't you have to do that? Just say it's the best way. And if they say yes, all you do is ask them how so, and they won't have a response that matters. It won't be very good. I've done it 1,000 times.
Yeah, well, they're going to say it's going to reduce inflammation.
And then all you say is, well, why would you want to reduce inflammation?
And actually, it doesn't reduce it. Again, that's even a misuse of the word.
And the inflammatory response, fortunately, the inflammatory response resumes when the tissue rewarms. Mm-hmm. So, because if it didn't, all the people who got ice would never have gotten better.
Oh, I've had that argument many times, that people kind of go, oh, you're right. Yeah, I put ice on it when I first got hurt, and it wasn't as swollen when the ice got on, and then the swelling continued as soon as I took the ice. And you can't leave the ice on forever, because then you cause more damage.
Right.
So
when you put the ice on, it can cause additional damage to the tissue, called frostbite on the skin. You can kill muscle cells. You can kill nerve cells. That's why you never put the ice pack over top of a superficial nerve. It's not because it's uncomfortable. It's because you kill the nerve cells. Likely doesn't benefit the stem cells that reside in the area. And then on top of that, you don't know how cold to make it, for how long to make it that cold, how often to make it that cold. You wouldn't know when it is as cold as you're trying to make it, because you have no way of measuring it. So you have all of these crazy things that fall into, you can't even do the protocol if it was a good protocol. There's no way to know what temperature you should make it. The very simple thing to ask, how are you going to accommodate for different layers of fat? So someone's 5%, someone's 40%. How are you going to accommodate for that? There isn't even an answer to that question, let alone how cold you should make it, how often you should make it cold, how you're going to measure to see how cold it is, how long you should keep it that cold. Is it 5 minutes, 12 minutes, 19 minutes, 47 minutes? How long? And then when should I do it again, and why? And are ligaments a different temperature than muscles? And what about if I have a deep bone bruise? What temperature should I make that? Well, what if it's a muscle bruise on top? How would I get the muscle bruise to that temperature that you don't know what it's supposed to be? Well, wait a minute. How would I get to a deep bone bruise without destroying the muscle on top?
You couldn't even measure the interior temperature.
Of course you can't.
So that's debunked.
And we don't have a number because it's fake. It's an illusionary treatment option. Right. That's the problem.
I think it was Einstein that had a great quote that I've recently heard and I love. And it says, you need to make, I'm paraphrasing a little bit because I don't know exactly how it goes, but it's like you want to make it as simple as you can, but not more.
No.
And it is. It's like just simplify it to the way that the body heals, But don't overcomplicate and don't oversimplify. You don't want to
Good
oversimplify because you don't want to say, well, I'm going to oversimplify. I'm just going to throw the ice on there until it fills. You don't want to do that. But you don't want to, it's overcomplicated to even try to figure out. So let's just go with the perfect simplification. The most simple is, this is the way the body works. Let's just help it do its
How
job.
about good stuff in, bad stuff out?
It's easy. It's not too simple.
You do that and you solve the problem.
But it's just the right amount of simple. That's great. Thank you so much, Gary.
I loved it.